The first snowstorm of December swept across Chicago, turning Michigan Avenue into a tunnel of white. Ambulance sirens echoed through the night, wailing against the wind like lost voices. Inside, one of them, Elise Carter, clutched the cold metal railing, her breath coming in ragged bursts. Each contraction ripped through her body like lightning through glass. "Hold on, ma'am. We're almost there," the paramedic said, voice muffled by the blizzard raging outside. Elise barely heard him. Her fingers dug into the stretcher. Her dark curls stuck to her sweat-soaked forehead. Every second was a battle between pain and willpower. She whispered through gritted teeth, "Please, just let my baby be okay." The ambulance finally stopped in front of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, its red lights flashing across the snow like warning beacons. The automatic doors slid open, releasing a rush of sterile air and the scent of antiseptic. The hospital seemed both salvation and punishment, clean bright and utterly indifferent to her suffering. As they rolled her down the corridor, her world was a blur of voices and white coats. She felt herself slipping in and out of consciousness, the fluorescent lights above flickering like memories she didn't want to remember. And then she saw it, the name, embroidered in navy thread on the chest of a white lab coat, Dr. Harry Morrison. For a second, everything stopped: her heartbeat, her breath, the world. No, it couldn't be him. The man standing at the end of the hall, clipboard in hand, was the last person she ever wanted to see. The man who had once held her every night, then walked out when she needed him most. The man who had called their unborn child a mistake. The man who was now about to deliver that same child into the world. Her pulse spiked, her throat closed. "Get him away from me," she gasped. The nurse looked confused, then followed her gaze and froze. "Elise." Harry's voice cracked, his usually calm tone breaking under the weight of something he hadn't felt in months. "It's me. I know who you are," she hissed, tears of fury spilling down her cheeks. "You don't touch me. You don't touch my baby." A sharp pain tore through her again. She screamed, clutching her belly. The nurse tried to soothe her, but Elise shoved her hand away, her voice shaking. "Find someone else. Anyone else." Harry took a step closer, the old instinct of a doctor taking over even as guilt drowned him. "Elise, listen to me. Dr. Stevens is in surgery. There's no time. Your baby's heart rate is dropping. Don't you dare say my baby's name," she spat, even though they hadn't chosen one together. The monitor beeped faster, an alarm, a countdown, a plea. The nurse glanced at the numbers and paled. "Doctor, the fetal heart rate's unstable." Harry looked at Elise, his jaw tight, voice trembling but steady. "Then I'm staying. You can hate me for the rest of your life, but right now let me save it." Elise closed her eyes, sobbing, as another contraction shook her entire body. The storm outside howled against the hospital windows. Somewhere deep inside her, something broke. Maybe her pride, maybe her fear. "Do it," she whispered through tears. "Do whatever you have to." Harry reached for his gloves, hands shaking not from cold, but from the weight of 6 months of silence and regret. As he leaned over her, their eyes met. For the first time in months, there was no anger in hers, only exhaustion, pain, and a fragile, desperate kind of trust. The world had been golden once. Elise remembered that vividly, how sunlight spilled over the marble floors of their Chicago apartment, how coffee smelled sweeter when Harry smiled across the table, his tie still loose from the early shift at the hospital. Back then, everything felt possible. They were young, successful, the city beneath their feet, and the future ahead, like an open road. Elise Carter had met Dr. Harry Morrison at a charity gala for women's health 2 years earlier. She had been the communications manager for a marketing firm in the West Loop, handling hospital campaigns. He was the keynote speaker, 31, confident, brilliant, a man who carried the quiet authority of someone used to saving lives. When he spoke about bringing dignity to childbirth, about giving mothers a safer experience, she'd felt something stir in her chest. And when he looked at her during the dinner that followed, it was as if the rest of the city had gone silent. Harry was not the kind of man who flirted. He observed, studied, and when he finally spoke, every word carried intention. "You asked an impossible question during my talk," he'd said, his voice calm, but edged with amusement. "You asked how medicine can heal without compassion. That's the question that keeps me awake every night." Elise had smiled, swirling her glass of champagne. "Then maybe you're already halfway human, Dr. Morrison." He'd laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd seen from him all evening, and that sound, rich and unguarded, would later haunt her through countless sleepless nights. Their love unfolded quietly, without grand declarations. It was the kind that grew in the small things: post-it notes on the fridge, late-night takeout boxes, the warmth of his arm over her waist when dawn crept through the blinds. Yet even in those early days, Elise sometimes felt she was trying to love a man built from glass, beautiful, precise, but fragile in ways he didn't want her to see. Harry's world was a cage of excellence. Son of a renowned Boston surgeon, he had spent his life chasing perfection to fill the silence his father left behind. He never spoke much about his family, but sometimes, in the middle of the night, he would jolt awake, breath ragged, whispering apologies to ghosts Elise couldn't see. When she asked, he would just say, "It was a long time ago. Go back to sleep." So she did, until the morning. She couldn't anymore. It had been early spring when she found out. The test turned positive in her bathroom, 2 pink lines staring up like fragile promises. She had sat there for a long moment, her hands shaking, her breath caught somewhere between joy and fear. A baby. Their baby. She had imagined his reaction, a surprised laugh. Maybe tears, maybe even relief. After all, they had spoken about children one day. Not now, but one day. That evening, she waited for him by the window. The city glowed below like constellations scattered across the lake. When he came home, she ran to him, smiling through tears. "Harry," she whispered, holding up the test, "you're going to be a father." At first, his face softened. He blinked once as if his mind were catching up to the moment. And then, everything changed. The warmth vanished. His expression hardened into something clinical, detached, the same look he gave in operating rooms when things went wrong. "Elise," he said slowly, his tone stripped of all tenderness. This isn't part of the plan." "What plan?" she asked, her smile fading. "My fellowship, the research project, the board position at the hospital, everything I've been building." She stepped closer. "We've been building. Harry, it's not the end of anything. It's the beginning," he interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. "You don't understand what this means for me." Her heart cracked at that word. Me. Not us. He rubbed his face, pacing. "A child will change everything. I'm barely keeping up as it is. I'm not ready for this. Then we'll figure it out together." His eyes darted to the test in her hand, as if it were a live grenade. "You could still take care of it." For a moment, she didn't understand. Then the words landed like a blade. "Take care of it." Her voice broke. "You mean end it?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Her tears came hot and fast. "You're a doctor. You save lives every day. How can you?" "It's different," he said sharply. "This isn't a patient. This is our child." The silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. Harry turned away. "I'm sorry," he whispered. But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the window, at his reflection, the perfect doctor, the perfect man cracking under the weight of something real. That night, Elise packed a suitcase. He didn't stop her. Maybe he thought she'd come back when the anger cooled. Maybe he didn't know how to fight for her. Either way, the door closed, and with it whatever remained of the life they had built. She left Chicago before dawn. The city lights followed her through the fog on the interstate until they disappeared behind her. By the time she reached Detroit, snow had started to fall, the soft, silent kind that covers everything you can't bear to look at. Her Aunt Lydia, a retired nurse, opened the door of her small brick house with a look that said everything: pity, love, and quiet strength. "You're home, baby," she said simply, wrapping Elise in a hug that finally broke her composure. Detroit was slower, quieter, more forgiving. The days passed in a blur of nausea and exhaustion, of late-night crying and early morning resolve. She found a part-time job at a local community center, helping with outreach programs for single mothers. She told herself it was temporary, that she was just waiting for the pieces of her life to make sense again. But in the quiet hours of the night, when she felt her baby kick for the first time, she knew she wasn't waiting for Harry anymore. Still, he lingered in her, in the way she made her tea, in the way she'd catch herself staring at the ultrasound photo, imagining his reaction if he had stayed. Would he have smiled? Would he have held her hand? Or would he have looked away, too afraid to see himself reflected in the tiny heartbeat on the screen? Her aunt never spoke badly of him. "Some men," Lydia said one evening, as they folded baby clothes, "aren't taught how to stay. Doesn't mean they can't learn. Just means they've got to lose something first." Elise folded a small cotton onesie, her eyes stinging. Then he's learning the hard way. By the 5th month, her belly had rounded gently. She found small joys again, the hum of her favorite record, the smell of cinnamon Lydia baked into everything, the baby's kicks that came like secret messages. She even began attending a prenatal class at the Detroit Mercy Clinic. The instructor once asked the women to write letters to their unborn children. Elise wrote hers in one sitting. "My little one, you were never a mistake. You are the proof that love, no matter how broken, can still create something whole. I don't know what our future looks like, but I promise you one thing: you will never be unwanted, never be unloved. I'll make sure of it." She sealed the letter in an envelope and kept it inside her journal. That night, she slept better than she had in months. Meanwhile, in Chicago, the city continued its rhythm without her. Harry threw himself into work, double shifts, research trials, conference papers. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, he was unraveling. He had tried to forget her. He told himself she was better off without him, that she would move on, find someone who didn't carry ghosts. But every time he walked past the neonatal ward, every time he heard a newborn's cry, he felt a hollow ache somewhere beneath his ribs. He kept seeing his father's face, stern, composed, a man who never forgave himself. Harry had been 5 when the tragedy happened. His mother had gone into labor at home, his father insisting he could handle it. Something went wrong. There was bleeding panic sirens. When Harry woke the next morning, the house was silent. His father never spoke of it again. Now, decades later, he saw the same scene replaying, not in his home, but in his choices. A man of medicine repeating the same mistake, letting fear masquerade as logic. He found the pregnancy test weeks later still in the bathroom trash. For a long time, he just stared at it. That small plastic thing, the symbol of everything he had thrown away. He tried to call her once. Her number was disconnected. The silence that followed was his penance. By late summer, Elise's pregnancy had become harder. Detroit's heat pressed against her skin. Her ankles swelled. Her back ached, but she carried on. When she went for her 7th-month checkup, her doctor frowned at the chart. "Your blood pressure's a little high. We'll keep an eye on it." Elise smiled politely, but fear lingered. She didn't tell her aunt. She didn't tell anyone. She just worked a little less rested, a little more. Every night she whispered to her belly, "We're okay. We're gonna be okay." But fate, it seemed, had its own plans. In late November, Lydia slipped on the ice outside the grocery store, fracturing her wrist. Elise insisted on driving her to Chicago, where Lydia's friend worked at a rehabilitation center. It was supposed to be a 2-day trip. She packed only what she needed, a duffel bag, her prenatal records, and the small letter she had written months ago. The highway back into Illinois was lined with skeletal trees and gray skies. Snow began to fall again, light at first, then heavier until visibility shrank to a few feet. By the time they crossed into downtown Chicago, the storm was raging. Elise could barely see the road signs. Her contractions began 2 hours later, sudden and sharp as she tried to check into a motel. Lydia panicked and called 911. The operator's voice was calm, professional. "Stay with me, ma'am. Help is on the way." Elise gripped the phone, her voice trembling. "Please tell them to hurry." Minutes later, the ambulance lights cut through the snow, red bright, like the heartbeat of the city itself. She didn't know then that the hospital they were taking her to was Northwestern Memorial. She didn't know that behind those sterile doors, waiting in the obstetrics wing, was the man she had spent months trying to forget. She didn't know that fate was about to stitch their lives back together, not with love, not yet, but with the thread of something far stronger, redemption. The fluorescent lights were merciless cold, bright, cutting through the chaos like surgical blades. Elise Carter lay on the gurney, her skin glistening with sweat, the storm outside echoing the one inside her body. Her contractions came in brutal waves, tearing through muscle and memory alike. The air smelled of antiseptic and fear. And then she saw him. Harry Morrison stood frozen near the foot of the bed, his white coat hanging open, his gloved hands trembling ever so slightly. The noise of the delivery ward orders, shouted monitors, beeping wheels, squeaking, faded into silence. Their eyes met across the sterile gulf, and time seemed to fracture into 2 lives, the one they'd lived and the one that was ending right now. "Get him out of here," Elise gasped. Her voice cracked, half scream, half plea. "Please get him out." The nurse, an older woman with kind eyes and lines carved deep from decades of night shifts, hesitated, glancing from patient to doctor. "Dr. Morrison is the attending physician tonight," she murmured. "Then get someone else." Elise's words hit like broken glass. Another contraction ripped through her, her back arching against the table. The heart monitor beside her spiked its frantic rhythm, filling the room. Harry took 1 step forward. "Elise," he began, his voice low, as if afraid of breaking her more than she already was. She cut him off with a single look, a look that contained every night she'd cried alone, every heartbeat of the child he'd once denied. The door opened suddenly. Dr. Raymond Harrison, the department director, entered, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. His presence carried weight, like the closing of a courtroom door. "Dr. Morrison," he said curtly, "a word, please." Harry didn't move. His gaze stayed locked on Elise, on the monitor, on the small pulse graph that was no longer steady. "Now, doctor." "Her baby's in distress," Harry replied without turning. His voice was steady, clinical, but underneath it, something shook. Dr. Harrison's brow furrowed. "I'm aware. And I'm also aware that this patient is your ex-wife. You shouldn't be anywhere near this delivery. That's a clear violation of hospital protocol. The nurse froze, torn between the authority in Harrison's tone and the urgency on the monitor. Elise groaned, clutching the railings, her knuckles white. "You're not going to move me like a chart on your clipboard," she hissed, her voice raw but defiant. "You're not the one feeling this pain. You're not the one carrying this child." Her words cut through the air, sharp and trembling. Even through the haze of pain, her pride burned bright. Harry's chest tightened at the sight. This was the woman he'd loved and feared in equal measure, the one who could stand in the storm without flinching. "Dr. Stevens is still in surgery," Harry said, his tone hardening. "By the time you find another obstetrician, both the patient and her baby could be at risk." Harrison's jaw set. "You're making this personal." "It already is." For a moment, no one spoke. The monitor beeped faster, and the sound became unbearable. Finally, Harrison exhaled a long, defeated breath. "You'll answer for this, Morrison. But for now, save her." He stepped back. The nurse adjusted the monitor. Harry moved to the head of the bed, his face close enough for Elise to smell the faint trace of antiseptic and coffee on his skin. "Don't touch me," she whispered, eyes squeezed shut. "Then hate me later," he murmured. "Right now, I need you to breathe." The words struck something deep inside her, not tenderness, but the memory of it. She obeyed. He placed a hand on her abdomen, feeling the rhythm of the contractions, the tremor of life pressing against the edge of existence. 7 centimeters, he said to the nurse. "We don't have time for a transfer. Prepare for an emergency cesarean if the heart rate doesn't stabilize." Elise's breath came in sharp bursts. "No, I wanted a natural birth." "I know," Harry said softly, meeting her eyes. "You wanted everything to happen the right way. But right now, the only right thing is keeping your baby safe." She wanted to scream, to curse him, to make him feel the same helplessness she'd felt months ago, but her body betrayed her. Another contraction tore through, and this time she cried out his name. "Harry." He flinched. That sound, his name in her voice, breaking apart in pain, cut deeper than any reprimand or lawsuit ever could. He leaned closer, his breath brushing her ear. "You're not alone anymore. I promise." The promise hung between them, fragile and trembling like glass. Minutes passed. The monitor's rhythm became erratic. The nurse glanced up. Fetal heart rates at 180 and rising. Harry's tone shifted instantly. "We're running out of time. Get the anesthesiologist." The nurse sprinted out. Harrison hovered by the door, his disapproval thick in the air, but he said nothing. Elise's face was pale now, her hair plastered to her forehead. "Look at me," Harry said gently. "Stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open, the same eyes that had once looked at him over morning coffee full of laughter, now burned with exhaustion and fear. "If anything happens to my baby..." He swallowed hard. "Nothing will happen. I won't let it." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything he'd failed before. They moved her to the operating room. The lights grew harsher, the sounds louder. Machines beeped, gloves snapped, surgical masks, muffled voices. Elise stared at the ceiling tiles as tears slid down her temples. Harry stood at her side now, gloved and masked, his eyes focused, but his heart splintering. The anesthesiologist arrived, murmured instructions, inserted the IV. The drug dulled her pain, but not her awareness. Somewhere above the sterile sheets, she could still hear Harry's voice, calm, precise, the same voice that had once whispered her name like a prayer. He made the first incision. His movements were swift, practiced, but tonight his hands trembled just enough for him to feel it. The world outside had vanished. There was only the rhythm of the monitors and the fragile sound of her breathing. Then silence. A pause, a heartbeat missing, the longest second of his life. "Come on," Harry whispered, pressing gently. "Come on, little one." And then life. A cry. A single piercing, furious cry that shattered the silence like a miracle. Elise sobbed as the nurse lifted the baby into view. "It's a boy," Harry said, his voice breaking, his eyes shining with tears. "You have a son, Elise." He handed the newborn to her trembling arms. The baby was small, his skin a soft bronze, his hair already dark and thick. He opened his eyes briefly, Harry's eyes, and then drifted into sleep. Elise kissed his forehead, whispering, "Alfie." Harry froze. "You already chose a name." "I did," she said softly, "because I didn't think anyone else would." He nodded, unable to speak. The room blurred around him. The weight of 6 months crashed down all at once, every sleepless night, every echo of her voice, every regret he'd tried to bury under work and silence. When the nurse took the baby for routine checks, Harry sank into the chair beside her bed. The sterile light washed over his face, exposing lines he hadn't earned from age, but from guilt. "Elise," he said quietly, "there's something I never told you." She didn't look at him. "You don't have to. It's done." "No," he said, his voice rough, urgent. "You deserve to know why." Something in his tone made her turn. "When I was 5, he began, my mother died, giving birth to my brother. My father was the surgeon. He said he could handle it himself. He couldn't." Elise's breath caught. He never forgave himself. Not once. He stopped operating, stopped laughing, stopped being alive. "I grew up watching him drown in guilt, and I swore I would never be him. Never take a life into my hands and lose it. So when you showed me that test, when you told me we were having a baby, all I saw was history repeating itself. I thought if I pushed you away, maybe I could control the damage before it began." He rubbed his eyes with the back of his glove. "I was wrong. So wrong." Elise stared at him. The anger she'd carried for months faltered, replaced by something heavier, understanding. "You thought leaving would protect me. I thought leaving would protect me," he admitted. "But all it did was destroy us both." The baby's faint cries drifted from the warmer. Elise turned her head toward the sound, her eyes glistening. "He has your eyes," she whispered. Harry looked at his son for the first time, not as a doctor, not as an observer, but as a man seeing the miracle he almost erased. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell steady and fragile. He reached out, tracing the air, as if afraid to touch him. "He's perfect," Harry murmured. Elise didn't answer. Her exhaustion was pulling her under, but before sleep claimed her, she said the one thing that stopped his breath. "You saved him. Now learn to save yourself." Her eyes fluttered shut. Harry sat there for a long time, listening to the soft rhythm of 2 heartbeats, the one he had almost lost, and the one that had always been his undoing. The storm outside was fading, but inside him, something new began to stir. Not peace, not yet, but the first fragile shape of forgiveness. When the nurse handed Alfie back, Harry cradled his son against his chest. The baby's warmth seeped through the fabric of his scrubs, quieting every ghost that had haunted him since childhood. The ceiling lights blurred above, glowing like distant constellations. He closed his eyes and whispered into the newborn's tiny ear, "I'll never run again." And for the first time in years, Harry Morrison prayed, not for perfection, not for redemption, but for the courage to be human again. Morning light crept through the blinds of room 412 at Northwestern Memorial, washing the sterile white walls in soft amber. The storm outside had passed, leaving the city wrapped in a hush that felt almost holy. Snow still clung to the window ledge, melting into slow, reluctant tears. Elise stirred in the hospital bed, the rhythmic hum of machines fading as consciousness returned. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she felt the weight on her chest, a small breathing miracle wrapped in cotton. Her son. His warmth anchored her to the present, to the reality that this child existed alive and safe, against all odds. She brushed her finger along his tiny hand, and the world for a fleeting instant made sense again. Her body still ached, the incision line burning faintly under the bandage. But pain was nothing compared to the sound she had heard hours ago. The first cry, that small declaration of life, cutting through the noise of regret. She looked down at him and smiled through exhaustion. Alfie. She whispered the name, forming like a prayer. You made it. The door opened quietly. The air shifted. Elise didn't have to look up to know who it was. His presence was something she felt before she saw, like a change in temperature, like gravity, shifting slightly closer. Harry stood in the doorway, out of his scrubs now, the white coat replaced by a gray sweater that somehow made him look younger, almost human again. His eyes searched the room before resting on her. You're awake, he said softly. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the sleeping baby. I didn't expect you to still be here. I couldn't leave. He hesitated, as if realizing how little weight those words carried after everything that had come before. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the slow rhythm of Alfie's breathing. Finally, Elise asked, Is he healthy? Harry stepped closer, the light catching the exhaustion carved into his face. Perfect, he said. Strong lungs, good vitals. He's small but healthy. You both are. She nodded, still not looking at him. Gratitude and resentment twisted together in her chest, like two vines that refused to grow apart. Harry moved to the side of the bed, but didn't reach for the child. His hands stayed clenched at his sides. I wanted to thank you, he said quietly. For what? For letting me be there. She let out a soft, bitter laugh. You weren't there, Harry. Not when it mattered. The words hung heavy between them, undeniable and deserved. He didn't argue. He didn't even try to defend himself. He just lowered his head. I know. Elise looked at him for the first time. Really looked. The perfect composure that had once defined him was gone. The confident doctor who had stood on podiums, who spoke about compassion and ethics, looked like a man stripped bare. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair unkempt, his hands fidgeting with the hospital ID clipped to his sweater. I don't know how to make it right, he admitted, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying. She exhaled a sound between a sigh and a sob. Don't say that here in this room. Not while I'm still trying to figure out how to forgive you. Harry nodded slowly, his throat tight. Then I'll wait, as long as it takes. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. Harry. He looked back. You said you were afraid, she whispered. Afraid of what? Of losing control, of being your father. The question hit harder than he expected. His mouth opened, but no sound came. He crossed to the chair near the bed and sat down, elbows on his knees, fingers interlocked. When I was a kid, he began, his voice low, steady. I used to listen to my father's footsteps in the hallway. I could tell what kind of night it had been by the way he walked. Some nights he was heavy, slow. Those were the nights he'd lost someone on the table. And after my mother and brother. He stopped, drawing in a long breath. He never recovered. Medicine broke him. Guilt ate whatever part of him was human. He looked up, his eyes glassy, but focused. I thought I was different, smarter, more careful. But when you told me you were pregnant, I felt that same panic he must have felt the night he realized he couldn't save her. I thought if I ran early enough, I could avoid the fall. Elise listened in silence, her heart pounding painfully slow. He wasn't asking for pity. He wasn't trying to excuse himself. He was confessing to her, to himself, to the ghosts that had been haunting them both. I kept telling myself it was the logical choice, he continued. But logic doesn't hold you when you wake up at 3 a.m. from a dream where your child doesn't have a face. It doesn't stop you from hearing the echo of your own cowardice every time a mother screams in labor. I've lived with that sound for months. Elise swallowed, blinking back tears she didn't want to give him. You could have called. I did, he said, almost whispering. The number was disconnected. Her breath caught. She had changed it when she moved to Detroit, too determined to start over, too afraid that hearing his voice would unravel her. She looked away, guilt flickering beneath the resentment. Harry leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. Every night I imagined you alone, and I hated myself for it. But when I saw you on that gurney, his voice cracked. You have no idea what that did to me. It was like watching every nightmare I'd ever had come true. Elise's grip tightened on Alfie. Then maybe now you understand. He nodded. Yes, he said. Now I do. Silence settled again. But this time it wasn't hostile. It was fragile, like something that could become peace, if given time. A knock at the door broke the moment. The nurse entered with a clipboard and a small smile. How's our miracle mom doing? She asked gently. Elise smiled weakly, trying to remember how to breathe. The nurse chuckled, then turned to Harry. Dr. Morrison, Dr. Harrison wanted to see you about the report. He nodded, standing reluctantly. Before he left, he looked at Elise. Rest. I'll check on you later. When the door closed behind him, the room felt different, emptier, yet easier to breathe in. Elise lay back against the pillow, watching the snow drift beyond the window. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the pain in her body or the ache in her heart. That evening, when the nurse came to check on her, Elise was sitting upright, holding Alfie close. The baby had begun to stir his little mouth, searching for comfort. As she fed him, the nurse smiled. He's going to be a strong one. Elise brushed a curl from his forehead. He already is. Outside, night fell softly over Chicago. The city's hum returned, muted under the snow. Somewhere down the hall, she could hear Harry's voice, steady, calm, issuing orders. She hated that his voice still made her feel safe. The next morning, she woke to find a folded note on her bedside table. The handwriting was unmistakably his, neat, sharp, precise. Elise, I know words are cheap, but they're all I have until you're ready to let me do more. Thank you for bringing him into this world, even when I didn't deserve to be part of it. You gave him life. You gave me a reason to start living again. Harry. She read it twice, her eyes tracing every letter like a wound reopening and beginning to heal at once. She wanted to hate him for the softness of it, for the sincerity she had begged for months ago. Instead, she folded it carefully and tucked it into the drawer beside the hospital bed. When Harry returned later that day, the light in the room had shifted again, brighter, warmer. Alfie slept peacefully in the bassinet beside her. Harry hesitated in the doorway. May I? He asked, nodding toward the baby. She studied him for a moment, then nodded once. He walked to the bassinet, his movements cautious, reverent. He lifted Alfie with both hands, as if holding something sacred. The baby stirred a soft whimper, escaping him, and Harry instinctively began to hum a faint tune Elise didn't recognize. His voice was deep, steady, filled with something unguarded. Elise watched him in silence. There was a fragility to him she had never seen before, a humility that felt foreign and raw. For the first time she saw not the doctor, not the man who'd left, but the father. When he looked up, their eyes met across the small space. "I didn't know I could love something this much," he said, his voice trembling. "It terrifies me." Elise exhaled, the knot in her chest tightening. "Good," she said softly. "Maybe now you'll understand what it means to stay even when you're scared." He nodded slowly, pressing his lips to the baby's forehead. "I'll learn," he whispered. The nurse entered again, cheerful and efficient, breaking the spell. "Visiting hours are over, doctor." Harry returned Alfie gently to his crib and stepped back. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said. Elise nodded, though she wasn't sure why. When the door closed, she looked at the sleeping baby, then at the snow swirling outside. Somewhere she knew the road ahead would be long, full of apologies. Trust rebuilt inch by inch, if ever. But as Alfie stirred in his sleep, she placed her hand over his chest, feeling the small, steady beat. Maybe, she whispered to him, maybe people can change. Down the hall, Harry leaned against the cold wall outside her room, closing his eyes. For the first time in years, he let himself feel the exhaustion, the fear, and something dangerously close to hope. He didn't know what forgiveness would look like or if he'd ever earn it, but he knew he couldn't run anymore. The woman in that room had seen him at his weakest and still let him hold the one thing that mattered most, that he thought was mercy. And mercy, he realized, might just be another word for love. The city was thawing. By late February, the snow that had once buried Chicago beneath silence had begun to recede, revealing streets wet with slush and reflection. The days stretched longer now, the light less cruel. Yet inside Elise's small apartment on the south side, winter still lingered in the quiet corners, in the half-folded baby clothes, in the memories she refused to name. It had been 2 weeks since she and Alfie were discharged. Life had rearranged itself into something fragile and uncertain. Nights blurred into mornings, and mornings into the heavy stillness of exhaustion. Elise spent her days, between feedings and fleeting moments of calm, her world reduced to the rhythm of her son's breathing. But sometimes, when he slept on her chest, she would look out the window toward the skyline, where the hospital lights still glowed, and wonder if Harry was awake somewhere, walking those sterile halls, carrying his guilt like a second heartbeat. He had sent flowers the day she returned home. White lilies and eucalyptus, elegant and understated, the kind he used to bring after long shifts when he wanted to apologize for being distant. The card attached was simple. "Thank you for saving both of us." She hadn't replied. Her Aunt Lydia called every night, her voice full of warmth and quiet worry. "You can't raise a child in the shadow of resentment, baby," she said once. "It'll grow inside you, like mold. You don't have to forgive him yet, but don't feed the anger." Elise had wanted to argue, but Alfie stirred in her arms, and the sound he made, soft, fragile, disarmed her completely. Anger felt heavy in a home with a newborn. There wasn't room for both. Still, forgiveness was a language she hadn't yet learned. One evening, as Alfie slept and the radio hummed with jazz from a downtown station, Elise found herself sifting through the hospital bag she'd never fully unpacked. Between folded blankets and discharge papers, she discovered the note Harry had left on her bedside table. She read it again, tracing the words with her thumb. "Thank you for bringing him into this world, even when I didn't deserve to be part of it." For the first time, she wondered if he had cried when he wrote it. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Harry, there's something I'd like to discuss with you. It's about Alfie, and about something else I've been working on. Please, just a few minutes." No pressure. She stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering over the reply button. Every instinct screamed, no. But something quieter, something that sounded suspiciously like the voice she'd had before everything broke, whispered, maybe. When she finally typed back, her message was short. Tomorrow, noon. The cafe across from the hospital. She regretted it the second she hit send. The next day, the cafe was half empty, filled with the scent of roasted beans and melting snow. Elise arrived early, wearing a long camel coat and a navy scarf that framed her face. Her curls were pinned back, and though fatigue still haunted her eyes, there was a calm dignity about her, a woman who had survived something vast and walked out whole. Harry entered 10 minutes later. No white coat, just jeans, a dark wool sweater, and the same look of hesitant reverence he'd worn at her hospital door. He paused when he saw her, as if unsure whether to approach or retreat. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi." He sat across from her. Between them, the table felt like neutral ground. "You look—" He stopped, aware of the landmines in every adjective. "You look strong." She almost smiled. "Motherhood'll do that to you." He nodded. "How's he doing? Good." "Sleeps in bursts. Eats like a soldier." Harry laughed softly. "I wouldn't expect anything less." The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the kind of silence that filled the spaces between people who still remembered each other too well. Finally, he reached into his coat pocket and slid a brown leather folder across the table. "I wanted to show you this." She hesitated before opening it. Inside were pages of typed proposals, charts, and handwritten notes. At the top of the first page, the Hope Initiative, a support program for expectant mothers in vulnerable situations. Her brows furrowed. "What is this?" "It's something I started drafting 2 years ago," he said. "Before everything. Before us. It was supposed to provide counseling, medical support, and housing for single mothers who couldn't afford prenatal care. But it stalled. Bureaucracy funding all of it. And then," he paused, searching for words. "Then you happened. Or maybe I should say you reminded me why it mattered." Elise closed the folder gently. "You want me to help with this?" He met her eyes. "I don't just want you to. I need you to. You understand this in ways no textbook or data sheet ever could. You lived it." A strange mixture of emotions flooded her: flattery, suspicion, and something dangerously close to hope. "So this is what your redemption project?" Harry didn't flinch. "Maybe. But it's not about me anymore. It's about making sure no one else feels as alone as you did." She studied him carefully. His sincerity was disarming. There was no arrogance left, no trace of the man who once believed logic could outrun emotion. "And what would my role be?" "Program coordinator. You'd oversee everything: communications, outreach, funding. You'd have full control. I'd be the medical supervisor, but you'd report directly to the hospital board, not to me. So you'd be my colleague, not my boss." He smiled faintly. "Exactly. Just don't make me fetch your coffee." Despite herself, Elise laughed, a small, genuine sound that seemed to startle them both. For a brief moment, the weight between them lifted. Then, reality returned. "I can't take a job that comes from pity," she said quietly. "This isn't pity, Elise. It's respect. You're the only person I trust to make this work." She stared out the window, watching the snow melt into tiny rivers along the pavement. The world outside looked washed clean, but she knew better. Clean didn't mean new. "I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking." When she rose to leave, Harry stood too, his instinct to reach for her barely restrained. She caught the motion in his hand, but didn't step back. For a heartbeat, They were close enough for her to smell his cologne, warm cedar, and something faintly medicinal. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. "Don't thank me yet," she replied, and left without looking back. That night, Elise sat by the window while Alfie slept beside her in the crib. The city hummed softly beyond the glass, distant sirens, a train rumbling somewhere in the dark life moving on. She opened the folder again, flipping through the pages. Every detail was meticulous. Budgets, staffing plans, outreach strategies. There were notes written in Harry's sharp script, questions, ideas, reminders. On the last page in the margin, a line that wasn't part of any plan. "Maybe healing others is the only way to deserve it for ourselves." Elise traced the words with her finger, her throat tightening. He wasn't the same man she had left. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something quieter, humbler. But humility, she knew, wasn't the same as change. It was only the beginning. She looked down at Alfie. His small chest rose and fell steady as a tide. In his face, she saw traces of them both, the curve of Harry's mouth, her own dark curls just beginning to show. "You're the best thing I ever did," she whispered, "even if it hurt like hell to do it." Sleep took her, eventually dreamless and deep. A week later, she walked into the hospital again, not as a patient, but as someone returning to reclaim her place in the world. The corridors smelled the same disinfectant and coffee, the blend of exhaustion and purpose. Harry wasn't there when she entered the boardroom. Dr. Harrison was. His cool gray eyes scanned her resume, then the proposal, then her face. "I hear you're considering coordinating the HOPE program," he said evenly. "I am." He leaned back. "You understand that working here again under Dr. Morrison could raise complications." Elise met his gaze steady. "I won't be working under him. I'll be working with him." "There's a difference." A flicker of something approval, maybe amusement, crossed his face. "Good. We could use more people who know the difference." By the time Harry arrived, flustered and late from rounds, she had already signed the papers. He froze in the doorway, surprise and disbelief colliding on his face. "You're in." "I'm in," she said simply. For a moment they just stood there, sunlight pouring through the glass wall, reflecting off the city below. Then Harry smiled, a small, quiet smile that reached his eyes. "Welcome back, Elise." The months that followed unfolded with a rhythm neither of them had expected. Work became the bridge they didn't know they were building. They met daily in conference rooms, exchanged ideas, debated details. Slowly, the silences between them stopped feeling like wounds and started feeling like space for something new to grow. The program began to take shape. Elise's natural empathy and sharp organization gave it heart and structure. Harry's expertise gave it credibility. Together, they built something neither could have done alone. One evening, long after the offices had emptied, Elise stood at the window of the New Hope office, looking down at the city lights. Harry approached quietly, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "I thought we stopped doing this," she said, taking one anyway. "Old habits die hard." He leaned on the glass beside her, watching the reflection of their faces in the night. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "that we were meant to destroy each other before we could rebuild anything worth keeping?" He turned toward her, eyes thoughtful. "Maybe that's how some things are born. Not from peace, but from the fire." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Something fragile, but undeniable. Not forgiveness yet, not love reborn, but understanding. For the first time in a long time, Elise didn't look away. Spring arrived in Chicago quietly, as if unsure it was welcome. The air smelled faintly of thawed earth and rain, the kind that left a shimmer on the skyline before disappearing into Lake Michigan. From her office window on the 12th floor of the hospital's annex, Elise Carter watched the city come back to life. Below her, tulips pushed through the soil in Millennium Park, and the streets filled once more with the hum of human resilience. It had been 6 months since the Hope Initiative launched, and already it had become more than a project. It was a pulse, something alive, that beat with purpose. The lobby downstairs overflowed with women from every corner of the city, waitresses, students, refugees, nurses, women who carried more than children in their arms. They carried fear, courage, and stories that reminded Elise of her own. She moved through the corridors now with quiet authority. People greeted her by name, nodded with respect. Ms. Carter, they called her, or sometimes just Elise, in that tone reserved for people who had earned their place. It was strange how easily she had slipped into this new rhythm. Meetings, interviews, grant proposals, it was the language of rebuilding. And in its cadence she found something she hadn't realized she'd been searching for herself. The door to her office creaked open. "You've been staring at that window for 10 minutes. Harry's voice teased lightly. Elise turned. He stood there in his white coat, stethoscope hanging around his neck, hair slightly tousled, as if the day had already asked too much of him. The years of arrogance were gone, replaced by a steadiness that wasn't performative. This was a man still learning, still kneeling before his own redemption. "I was thinking," she said. "That's dangerous," he replied, leaning against the doorframe with a faint smile. "I was thinking," she continued, ignoring the joke, "how strange it is that hope looks nothing like we imagine it. It's not shiny or loud. It's tired and messy and loud, with crying babies. But it's real." Harry's smile softened. "You've given it a face, Elise. That's what makes it real." She looked at him carefully. They were long past the days of practiced civility, but still not near the comfort of old familiarity. Every conversation was measured, balanced delicately between what was said and what still lived unsaid. "How's Alfie?" he asked. "Growing too fast," she said with a grin. "He's learned how to pull my hair and smile about it." Harry chuckled, the sound low and genuine. "Smart kid." "He gets that from me," she quipped, and for a moment they shared the kind of laughter that comes when wounds start to close without anyone realizing. A nurse appeared at the doorway. "Dr. Morrison, we need you in OR 2. I'll be there in a minute." When she left, he turned back to Elise. "You're speaking at the conference tomorrow, right?" She nodded. "You should come." He hesitated, as if unsure whether the invitation was professional or something quieter, something with a heartbeat. "You sure you want me there?" "Yes," she said simply. "It's our work. You belong in the room." That night when she got home, Alfie was already asleep. The apartment smelled faintly of baby lotion and lavender detergent. She stood by the crib for a long time, watching him breathe. The city lights spilled across the floor, painting his cheeks in gold. It was strange, she thought, how peace could look so small, 8 pounds of love wrapped in a blanket. She poured herself tea and sat on the couch, flipping through the notes for her presentation. It wasn't just about statistics or outcomes anymore. It was about survivalers, theirs. Everyone who had ever been told to take care of it and chosen instead to fight. The next day, the hospital's conference hall filled with journalists, donors, and healthcare officials. The Hope Initiative had become something of a phenomenon, an intersection of medicine and humanity in a city that had forgotten both could coexist. The banner behind the podium read, in bold blue letters, "Rebuilding Trust in Motherhood." Elise stood backstage, smoothing the lines of her navy dress, her heart thrumming with a strange blend of nerves and gratitude. Harry appeared beside her, wearing a suit instead of his usual coat. For a second, the sight of him stole her breath, Not because he looked perfect, but because he looked different, grounded. "You ready?" he asked quietly. "As I'll ever be." He nodded. "Then go, remind them why this matters." She walked onto the stage to polite applause, but within minutes, the room fell into complete silence. Her voice was calm, steady, but carried the weight of truth. "When I was pregnant," she began, "I was told my life was over, that my choices had become mistakes, that my future had been rewritten into something smaller. But I learned something in those months. Hope doesn't come from easy answers. It comes from survival, from knowing you've been broken and choosing to keep standing anyway." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. The Hope Initiative was built from that truth. It's for every woman who's been left behind, for every nurse who's stretched too thin, for every child who deserves to be born into something better than fear. And it's proof that healing isn't charity, it's justice. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. For a moment she let herself bask in it, not the recognition, but the rightness of it all. This was where her pain had led her. From the side of the room, Harry watched his chest tight with pride and something more dangerous, something that made his palms sweat and his heart remember how to ache. When she looked toward him, their eyes met briefly, and the world seemed to slow, folding them into a private silence no applause could touch. Afterward, reporters swarmed her questions, firing from every direction. Harry hung back until the chaos thinned, then approached with 2 cups of coffee. "For the woman of the hour," he said, offering one. She took it, her hand brushing his. "Don't make it sound like I did this alone." "You didn't," he said. "But you made people believe in it. That's something I never could have done." She tilted her head, studying him. "You know, 6 months ago, I couldn't even stand to be in the same room as you. I remember. And now," she said softly, "I can't imagine doing this without you." The words hung between them, fragile as glass. He didn't move closer. He didn't have to. The air between them was already charged with something neither dared to name. Then maybe he said quietly, "That's what forgiveness looks like." She smiled faintly. "Or maybe it's just beginning to." Later that evening, the conference reception buzzed with champagne and polite laughter. Elise stood near the balcony, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The city glowed beneath them, an expanse of light reflected on the river. She leaned on the railing, breathing in the crisp air, when Harry joined her. "Big day," he said. "Big life," she replied. He smiled. "Do you ever think about the night of the storm, every time it rains?" "Me too," he admitted. "But lately when I do, it feels less like punishment and more like..." The night everything started to change. She turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You really have changed, haven't you?" "I'm trying to," he said. "Every day. You and Alfie, you're the reason I want to be better." Elise looked down at her glass, the city's reflection shimmering in its surface. "It's strange," she said. "I used to think forgiveness would feel like forgetting. But it doesn't. It feels like remembering without bleeding." Harry's throat tightened. He reached out slow enough for her to move away if she wanted. When his fingers brushed hers, she didn't. They stood there, hands barely touching, 2 silhouettes against the skyline. People remade by pain bound, not by the past, but by what they were daring to build from it. Inside, someone began to play the piano. The melody drifted through the open doors, delicate and imperfect. Elise exhaled, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in what felt like years. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "what kind of story this would have been if we hadn't broken first?" Harry smiled sadly. "A boring one." She laughed, the sound soft and genuine. "Maybe you're right." When the music changed, he offered his hand. Dance with me." She hesitated. "Harry, it's just a dance," he said, voice gentle. "No promises, no expectations." Her pulse quickened. She placed her hand in his. His palm was warm, steady. They moved slowly, swaying under the soft lights, the city stretching endlessly beneath them. It wasn't the kind of dance that belonged to lovers. It was the kind that belonged to two souls who had finally stopped running. When the song ended, Harry didn't let go immediately. He looked at her with quiet awe, as if seeing her for the first time. "I don't know what comes next," he said. "Neither do I," she admitted. But for once he said, his voice steady, "I'm not afraid of finding out." She looked into his eyes and saw no arrogance, no guilt, only a man still standing in the ruins of what he'd destroyed, choosing again and again to rebuild. The night wind swept across the balcony, carrying the faint scent of rain and lilacs from the park below. Elise closed her eyes and let it touch her face. When she opened them, Harry was still there, still waiting, still willing to learn what forgiveness looked like in real time. Somewhere below, the city moved forward the way life always does after the worst storms. And above it all, two people who had once lost everything began, quietly and carefully, to find their way home. Summer returned to Chicago as if to remind the city that everything eventually softens. The lake shimmered beneath the sun, streets pulsed with the hum of tourists and taxis, and the air smelled faintly of wet concrete after the rain. Life in all its noise and movement had resumed its steady rhythm. Yet for Elise Carter everything felt new, like waking from a long winter she hadn't realized she'd survived. The Hope Initiative had grown beyond anything she or Harry could have predicted. What had started as a pilot program for a handful of women had now become a statewide network of clinics, workshops, and community centers. Donations poured in. Journalists wrote features. Even the city council had passed funding for expansion. But for Elise, the true miracle wasn't in the numbers. It was in the faces of the women who walked through their doors. Each one carried a story that mirrored her own in fragments. Fear, shame, perseverance, and eventually light. One afternoon in June, the hospital's atrium buzzed with energy. Banners hung from the glass walls. Hope, 1 year strong. Elise moved through the crowd, shaking hands, smiling, answering questions. She wore a white dress, simple and elegant, her curls pulled into a bun. She looked like the woman she had promised herself she would become, poised, grounded, unshakable. Across the room, Harry watched her from a distance. He hadn't told her yet, but this would be his last week at Northwestern. After much hesitation, he had accepted an offer to head a new maternal care division at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. It was an opportunity he couldn't have imagined a year ago, but also one that came with the quiet ache of knowing what he would be leaving behind. He had wanted to tell her before the celebration, but every time he tried, something in her smile stopped him. The way she laughed with volunteers. The way she bent down to pick up Alfie when he toddled through the crowd, giggling as though the world itself had become a softer place. He couldn't bring himself to interrupt that light. Not yet. When the speeches ended and the crowd thinned, Elise stepped onto the outdoor terrace for air. The city stretched endlessly below, bathed in gold light. She rested her hands on the railing, watching the boats drift along the river. She didn't notice Harry until he spoke behind her. "Beautiful view," he said quietly. She turned. "You always show up when I least expect it." He smiled faintly. Old habits. She studied him for a moment. He looked different, lighter somehow, as if the gravity that once weighed on him had loosened its grip. "You disappeared after the speech," she said. "I thought you'd left." "Not yet," he murmured. "But I might have to soon." Something in his tone made her straighten. What do you mean? He took a breath. Johns Hopkins offered me a position, director of their new maternal health division. I haven't accepted officially, but... She looked at him steadily, her expression unreadable. But you want to. It's a chance to build something big, he said, almost apologetic. They want to replicate hope on a national level. It could help thousands, maybe more. I'd be gone for a few months, at least maybe longer. Elise turned back to the city. The sunlight reflected off the river, throwing shards of brightness into her eyes. For a long time, neither spoke. The distance between them was filled with everything they'd never said. The history, the hesitation, the fragile truce that had slowly, quietly become affection again. Finally, she said, "You should go." Harry blinked. "You think so?" She nodded. "You're good at saving people, Harry. It's who you are. I just hope you've learned not to lose yourself in the process." He stepped closer, the breeze tugging at his hair. "I don't want to lose you either." Elise turned to face him, her voice gentle but firm. "You won't. But maybe it's time you stop trying to hold on to everything at once. You can't carry the past and the future in the same hands." Her words were kind, but they struck deep. He nodded slowly. "You always did know how to make the hard things sound like truth." She smiled faintly. "It's part of the job." A small cry interrupted them. Alfie, now nearly a year old, was toddling toward them, with unsteady steps held by one of the volunteers. Elise bent down, scooping him into her arms. He squealed and reached for Harry. Harry's expression softened instantly. "Hey, champ." He took the boy, lifting him effortlessly into his arms. Alfie's laughter echoed across the terrace. Harry looked at him. The dark curls, the mischievous eyes, the tiny dimple that appeared when he smiled, and felt something inside him break and heal at the same time. "Do you ever think about what he'll remember?" Harry asked softly. Elise glanced at them, her heart tightening. "Maybe he won't remember every detail, but I hope he feels loved. That's all that matters." Harry nodded, his voice almost a whisper. "Then I'll make sure he does." For a moment, the three of them stood there, mother, father, and child, bathed in the fading light. The city moved below, unaware of the quiet miracle unfolding above it. When Alfie dozed off against his shoulder, Harry handed him back gently. "I'll miss this," he said. Elise adjusted the baby's blanket, her voice soft. "Then come back when you're ready." He looked at her eyes, searching for meaning in her tone. "Does that mean—" "It means," she said, cutting him off gently, "that some doors don't close. They just wait." 2 months later, Baltimore air felt heavier, the ocean wind sharper than the calm breeze off Lake Michigan. Harry threw himself into his work just as he always had. But this time there was a difference. He didn't disappear into it. He built from it. His team spoke of him with respect. His patients, especially the younger doctors, called him the doctor who listens. In the quiet of his apartment, he often found himself writing letters he never sent to Elise, to Alfie, sometimes to himself. He kept them in a small drawer beside his bed, folded neatly. Each one began the same way. "I hope you're both okay." Meanwhile, back in Chicago, hope thrived under Elise's direction. The program expanded into neighboring states. She was invited to speak on panels, to share her story on television. Yet even with success surrounding her, there were nights when she found herself standing by the window, holding Alfie, watching the city lights flicker. The distance between them, between her and Harry, felt both endless and impossibly thin. One evening, as she was putting Alfie to bed, her phone buzzed. A message. "Harry, Baltimore isn't home without you two." She stared at the screen, a slow smile forming. She typed back, "Chicago isn't the same without you." Then after a pause, she added, "Come visit when you can." He started walking. It took only 2 days for him to reply, "I'll be there this weekend." The airport was crowded when he arrived, his heart pounding with a nervousness he hadn't felt in years. He spotted them immediately near the exit. Elise, elegant in a cream sweater, and Alfie now toddling beside her, in tiny sneakers, his curls bouncing with every step. Harry Alfie squealed when he saw him, and ran, or rather stumbled straight into his arms. Harry laughed, scooping him up, the sound raw and unrestrained. Elise stood a few feet away, watching quietly. "You weren't kidding?" he said, smiling at her. "He's fast." "Gets it from me," she replied, eyes warm. They left the airport together, the city rising ahead like a familiar dream. The weekend passed in moments that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. Breakfasts filled with laughter, lazy afternoons in the park, evenings spent on the couch as Alfie fell asleep between them. There were no declarations, no promises, only a gentle certainty that whatever this was, it was real. On the last night before he was set to leave again, Harry stood on the balcony of Elise's apartment, the skyline shimmering under a wash of stars. Elise joined him, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "I could stay," he said softly. "You could," she agreed. He turned toward her. "Would you want me to?" Elise looked at him, really looked at the man he had become, the quiet strength in his eyes, the absence of the arrogance that had once built walls between them. "I don't want you to stay because of guilt or loneliness," she said. "I want you to stay because this," she gestured between them, "is where you choose to build again." Harry stepped closer. "Then let me build." For a moment, neither moved. The air between them hummed with the soft tension of everything unsaid. Then slowly Elise reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. When she leaned in, it wasn't the passionate desperation of their past. It was something quieter, deeper. The kind of kiss that feels like a promise being fulfilled, not made. The city stretched out beneath them, lights glowing like constellations fallen to earth. Later, when Alfie stirred in his sleep, Harry carried him to his crib, brushing a kiss across his forehead. Elise watched from the doorway, a quiet smile playing on her lips. "He looks like you when he sleeps," she whispered. Harry turned, his voice thick with emotion. "Then I hope he dreams better than I did." Elise stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him, from behind her cheek, resting against his back. "He will," she said, "because we finally learned how to stay." Outside, dawn began to rise, painting the city in gold. Inside that small apartment, time seemed to still two souls, once broken by fear and pride, now whole again, not because life had forgiven them, but because they had learned to forgive themselves. And as the first light of morning touched their faces, Elise whispered into the quiet, "Welcome home." Harry turned, his eyes meeting hers, and in that gaze, filled with love, humility, and the faintest shimmer of tears, was everything they had fought for, everything they had lost and found again. The world outside moved on, unaware of the quiet miracle in a small Chicago apartment. But for them, the long storm was over. What remained was sunlight, warm, steady, and finally enough.